We've already done the invocation and the pledge, so we'll skip to item 3. Miss Nancy, do we have any public comments for the city council meeting?
Yes, Your Honor. Christy Smith would like to speak.
Great.
Christy Smith, 36630 Canyon Road. So I just want to bring this up because it's obviously budget. But first I want to welcome Nancy because I just got to meet you last night at the KSB meeting. So I just want to cover real quick for the council to hear Hurricane Beryl. Why everyone complains, I will say 1 million people were restored in 2 days by Centerpoint. That's kind of how I see it. Everybody complains. The contractors removed on average 7 trees a day, which we can relate to because we are in an area with mass trees. And we also have to look at the amount of rain. The city of Simonton, I'm on this little weather gauge, has taken in 46 inches of rain this year so far. So there's massive overgrowth, which is what we learned at the town hall meeting that Centerpoint granted us, 3 years ago when we had that wonderful town hall meeting. So they gave us a lot of education on what it takes to maintain. And the biggest thing that they said at the town hall meeting we had was please trim your trees and don't plant in utility easements. So since you guys are council, one of the things that we have it in our ordinance, 26.3, we have an easement ordinance, but we have nobody to enforce it. So as I drive through my community or even down Barnes Road, you can see there's a lot of obstruction. People have went past their survey lines, they have obstructed easements, there's trees not trimmed. So like I know in my neighborhood, the power line that powers my house was a massive tree on the Twinwood property that came down on the main line coming into Wagon. So the thing is, when these things are taken care of and we don't stop people from taking advantage of the utility easements and planting unnecessary stuff or not maintaining them, one person not doing that can affect the whole community to be without power. And we do have elders in our community that had to go get hotels and different things. And I know this was a crazy hurricane, but I don't want it to go by and as a city we forget that there is an ordinance to enforce not to obstruct our utility easements, and it continues to happen and happen. And I think not having a city ordinance enforcer kind of makes us all vulnerable, where we just have to live with everybody doing whatever they want, so which affects everyone. So that was my 2 cents.
Thank you. Alrighty. Do we have any other public comment?
Can I make one comment? Since it's open, I'm not on the list.
That's fine.
Since it was asked. And the idea of ordinance enforcement is an important one that came up, and it's come up before years ago. We did have a contract enforcement officer, Michelle Kilbrook, and the idea, it worked in this way, that if the city received a complaint, only then did the enforcement officer go out. The idea was so that it wasn't political, so that nobody was picking on their neighbor, and they generally wanted 3 complaints. They would adjudicate 2 or 1. They'd basically plea down 2 and go with 1. And we were simply looking for compliance. So that's the important part of the officer. Number one, they weren't full-time. And it didn't take long before people took those letters from the city very seriously. We only had to have court a few times. It wasn't a big hit to the city, so it can be done in a very cost-effective way. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then please state your name and address.
Daniel McJunkin, 1234 Pony.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 4, consider and take action on the consent agenda. We have 3 sets of meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Burns, Justin, any discussion?
I was just wondering why there aren't any financials on the consent agenda.
We usually do that during our regular monthly meeting, and since this is the first meeting of the month, we'll have that every time. All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 5, under new business, consider and take action on resolution number 2024-06. It's a resolution supporting and granting amended and restated consent to Twinwood Mud Number 1 containing various provisions relating to the foregoing subject and making certain findings related thereto. Phil, would you like to give us the layman's term on that? Please.
As lay as I can, yes. So the MUD, Twinwood MUD, or Municipal Utility District Number 1 was created about 1980. The development agreement that was entered into in 2015 with the company once it got there. So MUD was already created. It has been consented to, but for the creation by the city and the ETJ. So it exists. The development agreement exists as well, but just based on sort of how those two documents work together, what this resolution does and what the MUD's trying to do with the development agreement. So the developer and the board of the MUD are working together with the city to just get the whole MUD and development agreement area sort of under one central document. And so this sort of consolidates those two documents to be under the current development agreement. And so all this resolution does is sort of consents to the development agreement being the MUD consent agreement as well. So it's not reconsenting to the MUD that was already consented to in 1980. The MUD still exists, same MUD. The laws have changed since 1980, so based on a 1980 MUD consent, they can't build roads or anything out there because the 1980 MUDs couldn't build roads. Well, 2024 MUDs can build roads, right? And so this just sort of modernizes what that MUD can do out there with the development agreement that you have in place. And that's what this document does. It sort of brings those two agreements sort of under one accord, so there's no conflict.
Just a quick question. It brings the two together and allows them to do what the most current MUDs can do, correct?
Yes, the current development agreements that already exist with the developer that is working within that MUD, it allows it to where then the MUD can use that development agreement as well, whereas right now they can't, just the developer can't. And that's how the development agreements are set up. So setting up kind of, I think it's developer, yeah, sort of like strategic partnership agreements under the current framework, the 1980 MUD, for lack of a better term. The avenues they have to enter into strategic partnership agreements are the development agreement, which is why they're trying to get it under kind of one agreement. So it's all the same rules, all the same regulations, and then the ability to do things like strategic partnership agreements, construct roads, put out bonds, things like that.
Great, thank you. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Just Phil, so you're saying it's okay for us to do this? It's safe, we're not taking any chances or anything?
No,
It's just
no,
updating
precisely.
the current law.
And really, based on the current consent of the MUD and the current development agreement, this is an action that, and I've had multiple discussions with the Aaron Carpenter at AVHR, this is technically an action that they could take unilaterally because of those agreements. But I told them that it was important and valuable to bring it to the city so the city sort of understood what was happening in their ETJ, in their development agreements, those sort of things. So it doesn't change any of the current agreements, it just brings it all under an agreement that you've already agreed to in 2015 instead of the language that may have been there in 1980, which they even admitted on their side is, you know, they're trying to antiquate it, and it just makes the MUD not as capable as it would be under the current development agreement that the city already agreed to in 2015.
Any further? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, that's unanimous. Item B, very similar, consider and take action on resolution number 2024-07, a resolution evidencing consent to Twinwood Municipal Utility District Number 1, annexations and exclusions, containing various provisions relating to the foregoing subject and making certain findings related thereto.
Yes, and so similar in nature, again, with the MUD having been drawn out in 1980 and the developer now owning certain parts of land and agreed to in 2015, there's just some tracts of the land that are currently in the MUD that aren't part of the development. So they're just wanting it out of the MUD because they're not going to be developing that area under this developer. That doesn't remove the land from the ETJ, it doesn't remove the land from having any benefits that it would have otherwise had. It's just now the MUD is going to be perfectly aligned with the developer's plat of land, whereas before they didn't know who was going to come in and what plats were going to be bought and how it was going to be developed, and this just cleans up the boundary. It's for MUD 1.
Thank you. So this is also recommended.
And it's all the land that is owned by the developer, correct?
Yes, and even so technically even the areas that are proposed to be excluded are actually owned by the same developer as well. They just don't want it part of this development. However that's going to end up looking, it's probably going to be maybe it's going to be a neighborhood instead of a commercial center or something else. They just don't. They're just trying to clean up how their development process as well with this acreage.
All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you, Burns. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, unanimous. Item C is receive the mayor's report on City of Simonton's status related to Hurricane Beryl. Short report, everybody seems to be recovering well. There are still some properties that have limbs that need to be picked up. If your property is one of them, please call it in. We've posted on social media the county number to do that, or I'm sorry, the address, or you can also let us know if you don't get activity or if your pile is still there after this next week. We will continue to post on our social media pages and have information available here if anybody needs it about recovery efforts, if you need that. The county is offering lots of resources, and we're happy to pass those along. Item D, receive mayor's report on the status of AT&T service upgrade. It's just as easy if you try to do something with AT&T at your house, I'll tell you. I believe that we're gonna resolve that this week, and we're gonna be able to do it, and we're referring to the fiber optic line that runs to City Hall right now. We're gonna be able to do that without moving the line or having a new line installed. I wish we'd had this answer about 10 weeks ago, but after the site visit last week and some additional teams being brought in from the AT&T side, I think we're about to wrap that up. I've gone ahead and given the go to the contractor so that the schedule for the new foundation to be dug right next to this wall can begin. So we're finally going to be off to the races with that. That's it. So item 6 is adjourn into executive session. Y'all are welcome to wait for us for a minute outside, and as soon as we're done, we'll invite you back in. I'm going to call that 7:28. All right, we are reconvening at 7:43. Item 8, consider and take action resulting from executive session. There is no action to be taken. Item 9 is reports. Acknowledgement and thanks to Brett Boudreau. He removed a tree that was in the right-of-way. It was growing in the right-of-way that was blown down during Hurricane Beryl. And our estimate that we've got for the city to take that tree, even to cut it up and drag it over to the street so that it could be picked up, was $1,500. So I'm just, thanks very much for that. Saving the city money. EDCA and EDCB board updates. That's just to let the council know that EDCA and B met for a joint session last week. Last week, since we last met. They've elected their officers, and I think we have all but 2 board members sworn in. So they are very excited about that, and they are having their budget meeting next week. That's the end of my reports. Does anyone on council have a report?
Not this time.
Okay. Nancy, anything from you, ma'am?
No, ma'am.
All right, Bill? Okay. Our next meeting, not city council, but our next budget meeting will be next Tuesday, which is the 13th. Thank you. And then again on the 27th. And with that, we will adjourn at 7:44.